In this video we are going to create a user model, and before that let's go to src pages underscore app.js, and over here place a hyphen in between initial scale and save this file. And now let's clear the console and run our development server by running npm run dev. And with that being done, go to components. Inside our chat container, create a folder, call it model, and inside model let's create another folder and call it create user. Copy this, and we will create two files inside this create user model. One is the JSX file and another file would be our styles file called create user model.module.css. So let's do that. And inside our create user model.jsx we will create a React functional component and import our styles over here. And to create our model we'll be using the concept of React portals, and for that let's import React DOM from React DOM. So once this is imported, we can only render our portal on the client side and not on the server side. And to do that we'll use a state variable called isBrowser, which will be set as a true field only when the client runs successfully, right? So let's create our state over here. And import use state from React. And save this. And let's create our use effect for this. And inside this we'll set our browser field to true. Now we'll render our model UI conditionally using this isBrowser field, and to do that let's create a variable called model UI, which would be equal to, if we are running on browser, then we'll render our React portal using React DOM.create portal. It will have two arguments. One is our JSX element for the model, and the second argument will be the location where we want to render this portal. So we'll be rendering our model at the root level using document.js file. So go to your underscore document.js file, and over here create a div. And give this div an ID. You can give it any ID. For simplicity purpose I am giving it underscore next.js hyphen model hyphen root. So now save this, close this file as well as our CSS file for now, and let's move our JSX code inside our model UI for temporary basis. And the location at which we will be rendering our portal would be document.getElement by ID, and we will mention the ID where we want to render our portal. So that's next.js hyphen model hyphen root. Let's format our code, and before that let's return our model UI. And in the else part of our ternary operator, let's return null and format our code. So if we are on the client side, we will render our portal and it will render the model that we will be creating, and create a functional component over here as well. And since we are using React portal, we will be using next dynamic in order to create the portal. And to do that, let's import dynamic from next dynamic. As well as let's import our create user model through this dynamic. Let's format our code and save this. Now create a state variable in order to show our model conditionally. And it would be true by default. And we'll force our users to enter a username in order to use our application and chat, and for that reason we'll be showing our model by default. Also, let's create a event handler which will handle the close event internally through our model, and to do that create a function called onClose create user model handler. And we will set our state to false over here. And now in a return statement we will use React fragment as a higher order component over here. And if show create user model is true, we will show our create user model. Also, let's fix the typo over here. The C should be capital. So here, if we have our show create user model, in that case we will show our model UI, and let's create a variable for that as well. Before we do that, also encapsulate this inside a bracket and create a variable called let create user model UI. The C should be in a lowercase. And now based on this condition, we will show our create user model UI over here. Otherwise, we will not return anything to the DOM. Let's format our code and save it. And we also have to pass our onClose create user model handler to our create user model. Simply copy this and pass it as a props. Format our code and save it. Now inside our create user model, let's go and take this props over here. And now we will create the UI for our create user model, and to do that we will be using Bootstrap's model UI and modify it according to our requirements. And to do that, go back to Bootstrap's official website like we have done in the installing Bootstraps video. If you don't remember how to do it, watch that again and follow me on this video. So here I am on official Bootstrap 5 website, and over here go to components, and inside components you will find model. Click on model and you will find multiple models over here. Let's select the first model and copy its code and go back to our Visual Studio Code and paste this inside our create user model and replace this div over here with the UI that we have copied right now. We also have to make slight changes in order to run this application. Since we don't use class over here in our JSX, we will use class name. So replace that. Also, we will not be using tab index, so let's remove that as well. Format our code. Additionally, we will not be using the close button. We will be forcing the user to enter the username in order to close it. So we'll remove the close button over here in the footer as well as on the header. And we will change the model title to create user and save this. Also, with our class model, we will have to use d-block in order to show our model. Because of some reason, this model does not appear on the UI until we use display block. Save this file and now go to our index.js file. Over here, let's import our chat container. and use it in our JSX. Format it and save. Also go to our chat container, and we have used useState over here, but we have not imported it from React, so let's do that first. Format it and save. And now if we go back to our browser, let's see what appears on the UI. So we have our model over here, which looks fine according to our requirement, but it would be good if it would be at the center of the screen. So let's see how we can do it through Bootstrap. Let's scroll down below to find how we can do it. So there is an option called vertically centered, which can be done by using model dialog centered class. So let's copy this and go back to our code, and inside create user model along with model dialog, let's place this class and save, and check our browser once again, and we can see that our model is in the center of the screen now. Let's add an input element over here now. To do that, go to Bootstrap 5, and at the top search bar search for input groups, and you can select it over here, and you can see there are multiple examples in which we can choose one of our choice. So let's go with this one. Let's copy this code and paste it in our application. Under create user model, go and replace this model body text goes here with the code that we have copied right now. And for the input, let's place it self-enclosing angular bracket over here. Format our code, and let's click on save to check what appears in the UI. And if we go back and check our UI, you can see that the UI looks fine for us. Also, it would be good, in order to show the model, we could blur the background. To do that, let's go back to our model CSS file. Go back to our create user model CSS file, and over here create a backdrop class. Give it a background of, let's say, background color white, and it would have opacity of, let's say, 0.8. Now go back to our create user model, and over here just below the model create a div, and give this div a class name is equals to, it would have position fixed, as well as height and width of 100. Before that, let's use string literal for it. You can do this by enclosing your class name is equals to inside curly braces, and use the tilt icon just below the escape key, and inside this write position fixed. This is the Bootstrap class, and height of 100% and width of 100%. And to use our custom class, we will use dollar and curly braces, and use our styles variable that we have used by importing our classes, and inside this we'll write backdrop. Format it and save. And if you go back to our browser, you can see that the chat container is now blurred, which is fine for us. Now let's take input for our username, and to do that, go back to our code, and inside our create user model, let's create a state for username. And it would be empty by default, and we will need two functions, that is one for input change handler and one for submitting the username. So let's create them, and we'll name it on input change handler. Similarly, we will create another function for on submit username handler. Apart from that, we will also be having minimum length and maximum length errors for username, So let's create state for them as well. And by default it would be false. Similarly, the error for min length, it would also be false by default. And go back to our input change handler, and inside this we'll use a constant to extract a value from the event target. And just before this we'll use event.prevent default, to prevent default events, and we'll set our is max length error to false, and same for the minimum length error. And we'll check if our username length is less than 3, we'll show is min length error, and if it's greater than 12 characters we'll show max length error. So our error values are set, and also we'll set our input value to our state by using set username and pass on our value. And let's use this on input change handler in our input field. So in our code, go to input, and over here use on change and pass our function over here. And also let's assign our value from the state to our input, and click on save. Similarly, we have invalid feedback error message over here. So we won't be having a please choose a username. Instead of that we have min or max length error. So let's copy this and create one more error message and replace the message according to our requirement. And we will also render them conditionally based on our state for min and max length error. So we'll use is min length error. If it's true, then we'll render our message. If it's not true, in that case we'll return null. Same for our max length error. And let's save it and see the browser. So we don't have an error right now, and let's start typing our username. So it says min length should be 3 characters, up to 2 characters, and 1 and 0. And it also shows the error message for the max length, which works perfectly fine. Also we need to disable our button in case the error exists or the value does not exist. So to do that, go back to our code, and on our button we'll use disable property, and we'll say if there is no username, or if there is a min length error, or there is a max length error, or if there is a min length error. If that's the case, this button should be disabled. Also, we'll change the text for save changes. We'll use create instead and save this. So let's go back to our browser to see the results. Let's refresh this, and if we start typing our name, the button gets enabled, and if we remove this, it gets disabled once again. So let's type this and see if it works for the max length as well. Alright, so that works for the max length error as well. So that's perfectly fine. Now let's go back to our code and create the state for username at the root level of our application page, that is index.js. Go to src, under src go to pages and index.js file. Over here create a state for our username. Let's call it username over here as well. So we have our state over here, and also we'll create a handler in order to store our state at the root level through our create user model. And to do that, let's create a constant event handler for it. It will receive username, and inside this we will use set username and set the username that we have received as an argument. Let's format our code and save it, and let's also pass this on create username handler to our chat container. Let's format our code and save it, and inside our chat container, let's go and use this as a props. So use a curly brace in order to pass this props and use it over here. So just like how we have our own close create user model handler, we'll also pass our own create username handler to our create user model like this as a props, and go inside our create user model, and inside this where we have on submit username handler, we'll be checking if the username exists and there are no errors first of all. We'll see if there is no max length error as well as there is no min length error. In that case, we'll call our on create username handler and pass it the username and trim the username. And we will pass our on create username handler through the props like this. And once we have passed our username to the parent component, we will also close the model by calling that function over here. And let's call this on submit username handler on our button create on click event, and let's save this file and close this file. Similarly, let's save this file chat container and save this. Also, to check if the state is getting set, let's log our username over here. And save this. Now let's check our browser to see if our changes are reflected back successfully. On our browser, let's open inspect console. Let's refresh our application, and we have a warning that says that invalid DOM property class. So let's first fix this. So inside our create user model, we have this issue. So let's go back and fix this. So we have our class over here, and let's replace this with class name. And now let's see on the browser once again. Now we have another warning that says, do you mean HTML4 instead of for? So let's change the for to HTML4. So for our input label, we have this for, so let's change it to HTML4. And now save it. And now we don't have any warning and errors on our browser. So let's now type in our username and click on create. So once you have created a username, you can see that when I clicked on create model, and it has created the username and logged it to the browser console. Similarly, we have also used close model event handler, and it has closed the model. So we are fine with this step, and we have our username ready. So in the next video, what we are going to do is, we'll create our chat application UI in order to send and receive messages and create rooms. So see you in the next video, guys. If you face any issues, feel free to comment down in the